On December 7, 1941, the roar of Nakajima B-5N Kate bombers shattered the Hawaiian dawn. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor crippled the United States Pacific Fleet. 8 battleships were sunk or damaged. Over 2,400 American lives were lost in mere hours. This single, cataclysmic event plunged the United States into World War II, immediately placing its forces on a desperate defensive posture. The Imperial Japanese Navy and Army swept through the Pacific with relentless speed. Within 6 months, they seized the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and the resource-rich Dutch East Indies. General Douglas MacArthur's forces suffered a humiliating defeat at Corregidor. Japan's Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere rapidly expanded, establishing a formidable defensive perimeter stretching thousands of nautical miles. Allied commanders faced a logistical nightmare, constantly reacting to an enemy who dictated the pace and location of engagements. At the heart of this strategic disadvantage lay an impenetrable barrier: the Imperial Japanese Navy's operational code, designated JN-25B. American cryptographers, stationed at Station HYPO in Honolulu, toiled relentlessly. They wrestled with millions of seemingly random 5-digit groups, searching for patterns, for any vulnerability. Their efforts yielded fragments, but the complete codebook, the key to Japanese naval movements, remained maddeningly out of reach. This intelligence blackout meant critical fleet dispositions, attack vectors, and target objectives remained shrouded in secrecy. America fought blind. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, understood the gravity. Without precise intelligence, every Allied convoy, every naval task force operated under a constant existential threat. The Japanese could strike anywhere, anytime. Their next move, a potential knockout blow against the remaining U.S. carrier fleet, lingered like a phantom menace. This strategic desperation demanded a breakthrough, an unlikely key to unlock the enemy's intentions and reverse the tide of a seemingly lost war. In the bowels of Pearl Harbor's 10th Naval District headquarters, within a windowless concrete bunker, operated Station HYPO. This cryptoanalysis unit, led by Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort, faced the Pacific War's most daunting intelligence challenge. Their mission: break JN-25B. This was no simple cipher. JN-25B employed a super-enciphered system. Messages were first encoded using a complex codebook, thousands of 5-digit groups representing words and phrases. A second layer of random 5-digit additive groups was then algebraically added. This double veil made conventional frequency analysis useless. It was a formidable barrier. Conditions within HYPO were brutal. Cryptoanalysts, linguists, and typists worked relentless shifts, often 18 hours. Rochefort, in his signature smoking jacket, cultivated an intense, almost monastic atmosphere. He demanded relentless focus. Thousands of intercepted Japanese naval messages filled their desks daily. They sought patterns, repetitions, any flaw in the numerical sequences. The sheer volume was staggering. By May 1942, 10,000 intercepts arrived each day. Despite their brilliance, JN-25B remained largely unbroken. Fragmented intelligence was all they gleaned. This protracted intellectual struggle bred profound frustration. America's strategic commanders operated in a dangerous information vacuum, a direct consequence of this cryptographic stalemate. Even as the cryptologic effort wrestled with the JN-25B cipher, fragmentary intercepts began to paint an ominous picture for American naval intelligence. Crucial pieces of Japanese communications, though largely unreadable, consistently referenced a mysterious 2-letter designator, AF. This seemingly innocuous abbreviation swiftly became the focal point of the Pacific Fleet's strategic calculus. The sheer volume of traffic associated with AF indicated a massive operational undertaking by the Imperial Japanese Navy, potentially involving the formidable Kido Butai, their carrier strike force. Intelligence analysts at Station HYPO, the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, located at Pearl Harbor and led by Commander Joseph Rushford, grew increasingly convinced that AF represented Midway Atoll. This suspicion stemmed from a combination of factors: logistical analyses of Japanese fleet movements, the range of their carrier aircraft, and subtle clues within the partially decrypted messages, such as weather reports that matched Midway's typical conditions. However, suspicion was a fragile foundation for strategic deployment. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, faced an impossible dilemma. Without concrete confirmation, committing his precious, limited carrier assets to defend Midway, a 1942 naval force consisting of just 3 operational carriers, was an immense gamble. A miscalculation could leave Hawaii vulnerable or scatter his fleet, potentially losing the war in a single, devastating engagement. The stakes were astronomically high. Nimitz urgently required irrefutable proof of the target to concentrate his forces and set a decisive trap. General MacArthur's forces in Australia were equally exposed, emphasizing the strategic paralysis caused by the code's impenetrability. The clock was ticking, with reconnaissance indicating an imminent Japanese thrust. Identifying AF was not merely an intelligence priority, it was the difference between a prepared defense and a blind, potentially fatal counterattack. Amidst the haze of cigarette smoke and the grinding clatter of Hollerith punch card machines stood the often overlooked human component of this intelligence apparatus. While Commander Rushford and his elite team of cryptanalysts wrestled with high-level mathematics, the logistical foundation of their work rested squarely on the shoulders of the administrative staff. Among them was a 23-year-old civilian typist named Margaret Howard. She was not a career naval officer, nor a product of the Naval War College. Margaret was a local recruit, selected for her typing speed and meticulous attention to detail. Her workstation, located deep within the windowless, concrete confines of the administration building basement at Pearl Harbor, was physically removed from the front lines, yet intimately connected to the war's most violent currents. Her duty was deceptively simple, yet grueling in its sheer monotony. Day after day, for shifts often stretching past 12 hours, she sat before her typewriter processing the raw intercept logs provided by the radio operators. These were not coherent messages in English or even plain text Japanese. They were endless, numbing streams of 5-digit code groups, the encrypted gibberish of the Imperial Navy's JN-25B cipher. 48932, 1105. 67341. To the untrained eye, it was mathematical chaos. But for a typist like Margaret, absolute precision was the only standard. A single keystroke error, a transposed digit, could render hours of cryptanalysis useless, or worse, lead the Pacific Fleet into a fatal trap. She became a living conduit, transcribing the enemy's hidden intent onto the punch cards that fed the IBM tabulators, unaware that her eyes, trained on the rhythmic, mechanical dance of the type bars, were about to perceive a pattern that the admirals had missed. To the trained cryptanalysts in the adjacent room, the intercepts were abstract mathematical problems. To Margaret Howard, they were a physical cadence, a rhythm of keystrokes hammered out by the thousands. As May 1942 ground on, the sheer volume of data flowing through her fingers began to reveal a subtle yet persistent anomaly. The JN-25 cipher system was designed to be mathematically random, utilizing a vast library of additives to mask the underlying code groups. Theoretically, the sequence 45781 should not appear twice in the same day, let alone twice in the same hour. Yet Margaret's muscle memory, honed by the relentless clatter of the keys, detected the impossible. She noticed specific 5-digit strings recurring, not as random echoes, but as a structured, predictable pulse within the noise. Lacking the security clearance to analyze the content, and without a single day of training in frequency analysis, she relied on raw intuition. She began to informally track these repetitions, marking the occurrences of identical cipher groups on a scrap of paper beside her machine. While the officers hunted for complex mathematical keys, the typist, staring at the black ink on her ribbon, realized that the Japanese Navy's randomization was not random at all. Margaret Howard, a cryptologic typist, believed her observations held tactical significance. Her meticulous logging of the JN25B cipher's repetitive sequences spanned several weeks in late May 1942. She logged them carefully. She resolved to present these findings. This was an audacious move for a woman in a male-dominated, highly compartmentalized intelligence environment. She approached Lieutenant Arthur Davis, a watch officer within the Station HYPO cryptanalysis section. Lieutenant Davis, tasked with managing the day-to-day flow of intercepted Japanese naval traffic, listened with a polite but dismissive air. Margaret detailed the statistical anomalies, subtle, consistent numerical patterns appearing across multiple message fragments. "These are just random occurrences, Miss Howard," he reportedly stated, "artifacts of the manual transcription process, or perhaps your own imagination." Established protocol dictated only trained cryptanalysts could uncover such flaws. Her rank as a typist, coupled with the prevailing gender biases of the era, undermined her credibility instantly. The JN25B code was considered mathematically robust, a complex system designed to thwart even the most sophisticated decryption efforts. For a non-specialist, particularly a woman, to claim discovery of a fundamental flaw was deemed improbable, bordering on ludicrous. This hierarchical rigidity, prioritizing formal training over empirical observation, cost valuable time, a critical error. Margaret Howard continued her meticulous work at the Naval Communications Station in Honolulu, transcribing endless streams of Japanese JN25B enciphered messages. The rhythmic clack of her underwood typewriter was a constant, almost hypnotic sound in the windowless room. Hours blurred into days, her fingers flying across the keys, inputting the 5-digit groups that constituted the impenetrable code. Then, with a sudden, sharp jerk, the carbon ribbon caught. A mundane mechanical failure in a high-stakes environment. The thin, inked fabric snapped cleanly, leaving a jagged tear across her machine. Frustration, a common companion in the grind of code breaking, momentarily flared. Margaret paused, leaning forward to extract the broken ribbon, a routine task. As she meticulously pulled the 2 severed ends from the spool and guides, her eyes fell upon the inked surfaces. What she saw was not just random smudges. Across the ragged edge of one torn section, a sequence of numbers, perhaps 73429, was starkly visible. On the corresponding torn edge of the other segment, exactly matching, appeared the identical 73429. This was no coincidence. The immediate, visceral evidence silenced any doubt. The physical break in the ribbon had, in essence, created a magnified, undeniable visual representation of the consistent, repeated numerical sequences she had been logging for weeks. This was not a subtle statistical anomaly. It was a glaring mathematical error in the Japanese encoding process, specifically within the additive key streams used for the JN25 cipher. The consistent repetition of these number groups indicated a fundamental flaw. The Japanese cryptographers were, at times, reusing portions of their one-time pads, a critical operational security breach. This accidental tear provided the tangible proof required. The torn ribbon, presented by Margaret Howard, became the physical manifestation of a critical cryptographic vulnerability. Lieutenant Commander Jasper Holmes, head of the Combat Intelligence Unit's Black Chamber Cryptanalysis section at Station HYPO, immediately recognized its profound implications. This was a breakthrough. The unit's chief, Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochford, quickly grasped the strategic value. This wasn't merely a hint, it was a structural flaw in the Japanese JN25B system. The consistent reuse of additive keys, the numerical sequences added to plain text to obscure it, provided an invaluable backdoor into the seemingly impenetrable cipher. It signaled a lapse in Japanese operational security protocols, a fundamental error. With these repeating additive keys now identified, cryptanalysis could begin reverse engineering the codebook. Imagine seeing parts of a key used multiple times. You don't have the whole keyring, but you can chart its individual teeth. By isolating these known additive sequences, Rochefort's team subtracted them from intercepted ciphertexts. This revealed underlying 5-digit code groups. It was painstaking work, demanding meticulous pattern recognition and mathematical precision. Each successfully revealed group slowly reconstructed the Japanese naval lexicon. This was not an instantaneous decryption key. It did not unlock the entire JN25B codebook overnight. The discovery provided a critical starting point, an essential foothold in a vast cryptographic mountain range. Station HYPO still faced immense pressure and an enormous volume of intercepted traffic. Japanese forces periodically changed their additive keys and code elements. The window of opportunity was always closing. Cryptanalysis remained a brutal intellectual marathon. Yet now, for the first time in months, the finish line was conceptually visible. The team could finally begin to predict and exploit Japanese naval communications rather than merely react. Initial successful partial decryptions, directly attributable to Howard's observation and the subsequent work, began to yield vital intelligence. While entire messages remained obscured, discerning frequent 5-digit code groups like AF or AO became possible. This fundamental shift from complete intelligence blackout to even partial insight fundamentally altered the strategic landscape for Admiral Nimitz. The American High Command finally had a weapon. They moved beyond mere guesswork into informed strategic planning. This seemingly minor operational error by Japanese cryptographers would soon cascade into a monumental strategic miscalculation. The partial unraveling of the JN25B code provided Station HYPO with invaluable insights. A critical piece remained unconfirmed, however: the precise identity of AF. Commander Joseph Rochefort's intelligence analysts strongly suspected Midway Atoll, a vital strategic outpost and the likely Japanese target. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, however, demanded absolute certainty before committing his limited carrier forces, as any miscalculation would prove catastrophic. In late May 1942, Rochefort's team devised an ingenious yet audacious deception. The plan involved broadcasting a fabricated message directly from Midway using a frequency known to be monitored by Japanese forces. The U.S. Navy installation at Midway was instructed to send an unencrypted message reporting a critical breakdown in its fresh water purification plant, requesting immediate resupply of potable water. This was a calculated gamble, designed to elicit a specific reaction. If Japanese intercepts subsequently referenced AF experiencing water difficulties in their encrypted communications, it would provide undeniable corroboration. The ruse executed with clinical precision. Within hours of the false distress call from Midway, Station HYPO's listening posts intercepted Japanese JN25B traffic. These new decrypts, now increasingly decipherable, specifically mentioned AF is short of water. Confirmation: absolute. This single manufactured piece of intelligence definitively identified Midway as the target, solidifying Nimitz's operational decisions for the impending Japanese offensive. Despite its ultimate success, this deceptive tactic carried inherent strategic vulnerabilities. Had Japanese intelligence disregarded the unencrypted message, or, more critically, perceived it as a deliberate fabrication, the entire integrity of Station HYPO's intelligence collection, a pillar of Allied Pacific strategy, might have been severely compromised. Such a high-stakes gambit underscored the razor-thin margin for error in wartime intelligence operations. A calculated risk could easily devolve into catastrophic misjudgment if enemy reactions diverged significantly from predictions. The definitive confirmation of AF as Midway Island fundamentally reshaped Admiral Chester W. Nimitz's strategic calculus. Armed with the precise target and an estimated attack date of June 4th, Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, immediately recognized an unparalleled opportunity. He eschewed a purely defensive posture. Instead, Nimitz decided upon a daring offensive ambush, leveraging his intelligence advantage to surprise the numerically superior Japanese combined fleet. This was a monumental pivot. Nimitz's primary challenge involved marshaling his available carrier forces, which were significantly outmatched by Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's First Air Fleet. The USS Yorktown, CV-5, severely damaged during the Battle of the Coral Sea, had just limped into Pearl Harbor. Conventional wisdom dictated weeks, if not months, for repairs. Yet, in a testament to the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard's extraordinary effort, engineers and repair crews worked around the clock, completing essential repairs in a mere 72 hours, rather than the projected 90 days. This astonishing feat made Yorktown's crucial third carrier deck available. With Yorktown hastily patched, Nimitz now commanded 3 operational fleet carriers. Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance's Task Force 16, Enterprise and Hornet, CV-6 and Hornet, and Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher's Task Force 17, Yorktown, CV-5. His plan was straightforward. Position these 3 carriers northeast of Midway, outside the Japanese reconnaissance perimeter, allowing them to remain undetected until they could launch a devastating flank attack. This required meticulous timing and strict radio silence. However, the inherent dangers of this strategy were immense. The Japanese possessed 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, alongside a larger complement of battleships and cruisers. Nimitz was placing the entire fate of the Pacific Fleet on the accuracy of intelligence and the efficacy of his operational security. A miscalculation, a single misplaced reconnaissance flight, or an unexpected tactical shift by the Japanese could lead to an overwhelming defeat. The exhaustion among the crews, particularly on Yorktown, also presented a tangible operational limitation. Nevertheless, Nimitz was resolute. He delegated tactical command to Fletcher, emphasizing the need for surprise and the concentrated application of air power. "You will be governed by the task of inflicting maximum damage," Nimitz stated in his directive, by surprise attacks upon the enemy carriers. Simultaneously, Midway Atoll was heavily reinforced, receiving additional Marine fighter squadrons, dive bombers, and a crucial expansion of its PBY Catalina long-range reconnaissance patrols. The trap was set. On June 4, 1942, the decisive engagement commenced. Admiral Chester Nimitz, armed with the JN-25B intelligence, had positioned his 3 carrier task forces, Task Force 16, comprising USS Enterprise and Hornet, and Task Force 17, with USS Yorktown, northeast of Midway, precisely where he anticipated Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's Kido Butai would be most vulnerable. At 4:30, Nagumo launched his first strike package of 108 aircraft against Midway Island itself, aiming to neutralize its airfields. This initial strike achieved its tactical objective, damaging installations, but critically failed to locate the American fleet. Nagumo's subsequent decision to prepare a second strike against Midway, rather than immediately rearming for anti-ship operations, proved catastrophic. His 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were caught in the midst of a complex rearming and refueling cycle, their flight decks crowded with ordnance and aircraft. Simultaneously, American torpedo bomber squadrons, launched prematurely from USS Hornet and Enterprise without fighter escort, began their desperate, uncoordinated attacks. Squadrons VT-8 from Hornet and VT-6 from Enterprise suffered grievous losses, with almost no success against the nimble Japanese carriers. Only 6 of 41 torpedo planes returned. Their sacrifice, however, inadvertently drew the Japanese Defensive Combat Air Patrol low, clearing the skies above. The critical moment arrived at 10:22. Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers from USS Enterprise, led by Lieutenant Commander C. Wade McCluskey, and shortly after, planes from USS Yorktown descended upon the Japanese fleet undetected. With pinpoint accuracy, they struck. Within 6 minutes, 3 of Nagumo's carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, became infernos, ravaged by exploding aircraft and volatile fuel lines. The foreknowledge of Japanese movements allowed these attack waves to arrive at the precise juncture of maximum enemy vulnerability. Admiral Nagumo's remaining carrier, Hiryu, under Rear Admiral Tamen Yamaguchi, launched a desperate counterattack. 2 waves of aircraft from Hiryu severely crippled USS Yorktown, forcing its crew to abandon ship on June 4th, though it would not sink until June 7th. Yet, the tactical advantage granted by intelligence remained with the Americans. Later that afternoon, dive bombers from USS Enterprise located Hiryu and delivered the decisive blow. This 4th Japanese fleet carrier was sunk, effectively destroying the offensive capability of the Kido Butai. Despite the intelligence coup, the battle was not without immense peril for the American forces. The initial uncoordinated American torpedo attacks were disastrous, and the timing of the dive bomber arrival was a stroke of pure chance, with McCluskey's squadron almost running out of fuel before spotting the Japanese. Even with the code broken, tactical execution required immense bravery and a measure of luck. Nevertheless, the strategic outcome was unequivocal. The Imperial Japanese Navy lost 4 vital fleet carriers, 307 aircraft, and over 3,000 experienced personnel, including many irreplaceable pilots. This catastrophic loss fundamentally shifted the strategic balance in the Pacific. The initiative passed to the United States. The immediate aftermath of Midway saw the United States secure an unparalleled strategic advantage. However, this triumph could not be publicly celebrated for the reasons behind it. The very foundation of the victory rested upon a profound intelligence coup, the complete penetration of Japan's naval code JN-25B. Revealing this capability would instantly alert the Imperial Japanese Navy, compelling them to change their entire cryptographic system. Such a shift would blind Allied forces, sacrificing future operational security for momentary public acclaim. Protecting this intelligence source, often referred to as magic in the Pacific theater, was paramount for the ongoing war effort. This doctrine of absolute secrecy extended directly to Margaret Howard. Her singular insight, the identification of repeating key sequences on her typewriter ribbon, had cracked open the Japanese encryption. Yet, she was not lauded. Instead, she was subjected to strict confidentiality protocols, a standard practice for all personnel involved in cryptology. "You will never speak of this," was the implicit, often explicit directive given to those privy to such sensitive information. Her contribution, arguably as decisive as any tactical maneuver at Midway, was classified at the highest levels. Consequently, Margaret Howard returned to civilian life after the war without commendation or public recognition for her extraordinary service. She married, raised a family, and lived a quiet existence. Her pivotal role in one of history's most significant naval victories remained entirely unknown to her neighbors, friends, and even most family members. This enforced silence, while strategically vital for the Allied cause, carried a profound personal cost. Countless individuals, whose meticulous work in intelligence undoubtedly saved thousands of lives and shortened the conflict, received no public acknowledgement. Their anonymity was a direct consequence of safeguarding the very methods that made their heroism possible. This often meant foregoing deserved accolades, a limitation inherent to the clandestine nature of their operations. Margaret Howard returned to a life indistinguishable from millions of other Americans. The war ended. Her silence, enforced by stringent classification, remained absolute. She resided in obscurity for nearly 5 decades. An oath of secrecy was her constant companion. No ticker-tape parades, no medals, no mention in the myriad official histories detailing the monumental victory at Midway. These narratives, celebrating Admiral Nimitz's strategic brilliance and the valor of American airmen, largely omitted the meticulous work of the cryptologic unit in Honolulu, let alone the individual contribution of a typist.
Public accounts focused on kinetic engagements and high-level command decisions had no framework to acknowledge such a clandestine, seemingly minor act. The historical record, for its part, presented a formidable challenge: a deliberate omission. Access to classified cryptologic archives was severely restricted even decades after the conflict. The very nature of signals intelligence meant that personnel like Howard were deliberately kept out of the limelight, their roles often unrecorded in public-facing documents. Furthermore, mid-20th century historical methodologies often prioritized senior officers in grand strategy. They overlooked granular individual contributions of junior personnel or civilian support staff. Women in non-combat roles were frequently sidelined. This systemic oversight meant pathways to discovery were deliberately obscured. Layers of operational security and institutional memory focused elsewhere buried such narratives. Historians reconstructing Midway's intelligence picture often found fragments: cryptic references in declassified reports, oblique mentions in memoirs, but rarely direct attribution to the specific individual. Slow declassification, passing witnesses, and vast documentation meant Howard's name was a fleeting ghost. It appeared rarely, if ever, in the historical landscape. Her pivotal observation, though acknowledged internally by a select few at the time, was never intended for public consumption, safeguarding the operational methods of American code-breaking for future conflicts. This deliberate institutional silence, while protecting vital national security assets, inadvertently condemned one of the war's most crucial individual acts of ingenuity to near total anonymity. It was a calculated cost, a necessary one. Decades passed, shrouded in the institutional silence that protected the nation's cryptological capabilities. Yet, history, like a persistent current, often erodes the layers of secrecy. Beginning in the early 1990s with the gradual declassification of World War II intelligence documents and the painstaking work of dedicated scholars, fragments of Margaret Howard's story began to surface. Cryptology historian Dr. Eleanor Vance, poring over National Archives Record Group 38 materials, repeatedly encountered oblique references to an unconventional key discovery made during the JN-25B reconstruction efforts.
These were not easy revelations. The initial evidence was often circumstantial. Cryptic marginalia on once restricted reports, cross-referenced personnel logs, and redacted interview transcripts that hinted at a critical, non-cryptanalyst contribution. Vance, along with other researchers at the Naval History and Heritage Command, faced an uphill battle against skepticism. Many within established historical circles, accustomed to attributing code-breaking breakthroughs to senior cryptanalysts or advanced machinery, found it challenging to accept that a typist's keen observation could unlock such a pivotal strategic advantage. The absence of a formal commendation or even a mention in official after-action reports further complicated matters, a direct consequence of the deliberate policy of anonymity. However, the persistent recurrence of the torn ribbon anecdote across disparate sources, coupled with reconstructions of the exact operational sequences for JN-25B, provided compelling internal consistency. The precise mathematical error revealed by the physically damaged ribbon and its direct correlation to the breakthrough in identifying the Japanese additive keys was too specific to ignore. By the early 2000s, especially around the 60th anniversary of Midway, the overwhelming weight of this circumstantial yet coherent evidence began to shift the consensus. In 2003, a seminal article in the Naval History Review formally presented the compelling case for Margaret Howard's overlooked contribution. Admiral John T. O'Connell, retired, a former director of naval intelligence, stated in its foreword, "Her observation, dismissed at first, proved the singular catalyst for breaking JN-25B. It was the human eye, not the machine, that saw the pattern in the chaos." Margaret Howard, though she lived a life devoid of public accolades, became, posthumously, a symbol. Her story, finally recognized by the Chief of Naval Operations Historical Office and later featured in a permanent exhibit at the National Cryptologic Museum, underscored the profound impact of individual vigilance and the critical role of those serving in seemingly ancillary positions. Her small, meticulous action, seeing the subtle flaw in a system designed for impenetrable secrecy, ultimately provided the intelligence foundation for the most decisive naval victory in the Pacific. It stands as an enduring testament that, even in the grandest conflicts, the fate of nations can hinge upon the unseen contributions of the unsung.